If you are a small business operating in the United States, whether you are for-profit or a nonprofit, there is a new filing requirement that you must adhere to. If you don't, you may risk paying $591 a day in fines, and you also may risk imprisonment. But what is it and how does it apply to your situation, especially if you have a nonprofit? Because a lot of my videos focuses on nonprofits. So what I'm going to do in this video is explain what this new reporting requirement is, where is it coming from, why is it required now. I'm going to go over some definitions so you can help understand whether or not the situation applies to you. Then I'm going to break down how to actually do the filing so you can see the steps. And finally, I'm going to share some information at the end about compliance and any ongoing requirements as a part of this new law that was passed, especially for nonprofits who have changes in their tax exempt status. There are a couple of things you just need to know, and I'm going to break all of it down in this video today. Let's get into it. So what is this new requirement I'm talking about? It's the BOIR, or the Beneficial Owners Information Report. And you may have seen a lot of news articles about this lately. And the reason why you're seeing it is because certain deadlines are coming very close, and there have been some court cases pausing the deadline, lifting the deadline, all the things. I'm going to give you a little bit of the juiciness later in this video, but let's talk about what the requirement is and where it came from. So the Corporate Transparency Act of 2001 was passed as a part of a larger bill, and in that act it created a federal database where the Department of Treasury was required to track the ownership information of certain business entities that are operating in the United States. Why? Because there are certain people who use shell companies or who have ownership stakes in businesses, and they use those businesses to cover up illegal or illicit activities, or there may be foreigners who may be using U.S. companies to hide illegal activities. And the federal government believes that it's an economic security risk and it's a national security risk. So the reason why this report is in place is to track the ownership information of everyone who creates an official business entity in the United States. Some people are really skeptical about this and are curious why now, but let me share a little bit of history. This is not something new. Congress has been trying to enact rules like this since 2006. There have been multiple attempts to put some kind of system in place so that the federal government can track people who are creating businesses. And this actually isn't something new. So banks already do this, title companies already do this. So you know how you have to create a checking account and you have to let them know who the owners are of the account. They want to know basic information about who wants to open the account, who wants to be on the account. It's the same thing. But what this is doing is it's creating a large central database, and it's putting it squarely in the hands of the Department of Treasury, specifically the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is under the Department of Treasury, FinCEN, okay? And as I talk through this video, I'm going to be putting some links on the screen and in the description box so you can see the information for yourself, because some people are like, this doesn't seem believable, it's probably a scam. It's not. It's actually a requirement, and you do have to pay serious attention to it. So the Department of Treasury was required by this law to create a central database to track this information, and it's basic information about who is responsible or who are the owners of businesses that are being created. So you may be asking yourself, why am I just now hearing about this? If this passed in 2001, why are we going into 2025 and now all of a sudden a lot of people seem to be talking about it? Let me just say this, that FinCEN did not start gathering the information until January 1st of 2024. So it took some time for FinCEN to develop the regulations and develop the rules around how things are going to be reported, and that wasn't completed until the end of 2023. So the requirement of filing this report was not actually a thing until the beginning of 2024. And they gave older businesses quite some time to be able to report their owner information before they start racking up penalties and fines. So this has actually been in play all year of 2024, and they have been releasing information about this and telling people about the requirements. People have done YouTube videos on this. I did a really quick YouTube video on this early in 2024, but for some reason a lot of people just did not know about this requirement. So what I'm going to do next is talk about some definitions, because not everybody is required to file this information. So after that, I'm going to talk about what you actually have to file and what it looks like, because it's not as complicated as people are making it. So let's talk about some definitions. I want to talk about two things. What is a reporting company and what is a beneficial owner? So the point of this report is that the beneficial owners have to reveal themselves, basically. You have to identify the identities and the address information for people who have ownership stake in these businesses. But the question is, who's required to do this? So the legislation calls entities that are required to file reports reporting companies. So you're going to see those words over and over again when you go to the FinCEN website, reporting company. So when they say that, they just mean the businesses or entities that are required to file this report. So what is their official definition of a reporting company? Basically, a reporting company is an entity that had to file some paperwork in the state in order to do business in the United States. And so most people who have to file paperwork are LLCs or corporations. So typically, if your business entity fits within either a corporation or LLC, then you probably have to file this report. Now, there are a lot of exemptions that I'm going to talk about, but that's the first step. If you are an LLC or a corporation and you file paperwork in order to establish that, then more than likely you're required to file something. Now, if you're a nonprofit, you are a corporation typically, right? So if you are a corporation, this may apply to you as well. Tax exempt organizations are actually exempt from filing this report, but that doesn't mean just because you're a nonprofit, you don't have to file. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but let's take this step by step. So we got that established. If you're an LLC or if you're a corporation, you more than likely have to file. So if you are a foreign company, but you apply to do business in the United States, you filled out some information in order to conduct business in the United States as an official entity, then you are required to file as well. Now, a lot of people who do business don't officially file paperwork with the Secretary of State's office in their state. They may be operating as a sole proprietor. And so sometimes what they'll do is they'll apply for an EIN number, an employer identification number with the IRS. And that's for tax purposes, so they can kind of separate their personal social security number with the business activities that they're doing as a sole proprietor. That does not fit the definition of a reporting company for this particular report. So if you are a sole proprietor, you're not required to file necessarily unless you filed some official paperwork with the state. So they're kind of using that as the judge to determine whether or not an entity is required to file. If you only file paperwork with the IRS to get an employer identification number, you're not necessarily considered a reporting company. It all comes down to whether or not you filed something with the Secretary of State's office in one of the states. So just keep that in mind. So the next definition is a beneficial owner. Who qualifies as a beneficial owner? So there are two main criteria. One is if a person exercises substantial control over the company, and then number two, if the person has at least 25% of the ownership's interest in the company. And beneficial owners, by this definition for this reporting requirement, are individuals. So in most circumstances, they're not talking about a business that owns a business, right? They're talking about people who have ownership stake. They want to know who the people are, and that's what beneficial owners is referring to when you see documentation about this requirement. So how does this apply to nonprofits? Because if you're a nonprofit, you know you don't have owners. You know that there are people who don't have ownership stake, right? But there may be people like your board members who exercise substantial control over the organization, which, by the way, you have to report that information anyway. So just know that this is mainly talking about for-profit entities. So when you see information that talks about ownership interest or ownership stake, it may confuse you because you have a nonprofit, but just know generally if you are tax exempt, then it doesn't apply to you. So it's not supposed to make sense to you because it doesn't apply to you. But that doesn't mean though that you still should not pay attention to these requirements or keep up with this requirement, because even if you are a nonprofit or even if you are a tax exempt nonprofit, you still may have to report certain things. And I'm going to talk about in what circumstances you have to do that. So we just talked about who's required and who this applies to when it comes to submitting the beneficial owner information report. So let's talk about like how to do it, what's required, the process the nitty-gritty of it all. So I'm pretty sure if you Google BOIR or beneficial owner information report, you're going to get a lot of information coming back on you that is not from the federal government, but they're from third-party companies that are saying, hey, this is a requirement, you're going to face fines, pay us to file this for you. And there are a lot of people who are like, I'm scared, I don't really understand it, I don't have the time to understand it, and so I'm just going to pay somebody to do it. So I've seen some people say they paid $25. I've seen people say I paid $300. I got my lawyer to do it. I got my accountant to do it. This is just what I want to say about this. This requirement is extremely easy. This requirement can be done online and can be done in less than 5 minutes. I have done this for my own businesses. I've done it myself. And it's not just because I'm comfortable on the computer that it was easy. It is extremely easy. But you just need to make sure that you're going to the right place and that you're not falling risk of people who are giving you false information. So what I want to do is actually show you on this screen what it looks like when you begin to file your beneficial owner information report, so you can see what it actually looks like. What I'll say is make sure you're at the FinCEN website. If there's any other place that you're going to file this report, then your antenna should be up. You should question that. As I said before, this legislation created a central database. There's one place that collects this information. So you need to go to that one place that is responsible for collecting the information to report the beneficial owners of your organization. So go to the fincen.gov website. They have a lot of resources, frequently asked questions, and information about this report, about why it's required, about compliance and who's exempt, and all those things. So what I would do is I would go directly to the FinCEN website and enter my information there. There are 3 ways that they're allowing people to file the information. You can file it by filling out a PDF and submitting that PDF. You can file it through their online system. And they also have a way that if a third-party company wants to file it for you and they can collect the information on their side and directly transmit it to FinCEN, then they actually allow third-party companies to do that. In my opinion, I want to control my information. I want to know that it's being done correctly. So if it were me, I would go directly to the FinCEN website and just fill it in that way. But I just want to let you know that there are 3 ways to do that. On the screen, I'm showing you what it actually looks like when you're going to the BOIR homepage, so you can get used to and accustomed to what it's supposed to look like. And everywhere on that page it says, click here to file, use the online reporting system, click here to file. But make sure you're on the right website. Make sure you're on a .gov website to protect yourself, because if you just Google search BOIR, so many things will come up for you and it will distract you, right? So you want to make sure you're at the right place. And I can't actually go through the process because, first of all, it will reveal personally identifying information, and I've already done my own reports, but it's a very simple process. All that's required is the name of the entity. You confirm some things about the organization. You identify the beneficial owners, including their full legal name, their date of birth, a current address for each owner, and some kind of ID number to identify that person. There's really not a lot of information that you have to submit and file as a part of this process. And once you go through it, you'll see how easy it is, and it takes 5 minutes to do it. It'll ask you to confirm some information about your organization, like your tax ID number, your address for your organization, and then it'll ask you to fill in information about your beneficial owners. So there are several entity types that are exempt from this reporting requirement. There are actually 23 exemptions, and in this video I'm not going to list out all the exemptions, but I'll just give you a couple examples. And on the screen I'm going to show you the chart that FinCEN developed that shows you all the exempt organizations. But banks, credit unions, businesses that make more than $5 million a year, has 20 or more employees, and other requirements and things like that. So larger businesses are actually not required to file this. It's more so targeted to smaller businesses. So how does this apply to nonprofits though? So tax exempt organizations are actually exempt from filing this requirement. So if your organization is a 501c tax exempt organization, you're actually exempt from filing. If your organization was created only to support financially a 501c organization, you're also exempt. If you're an organization that's been in existence for over a year, but you haven't done any active activities and you're not tax exempt yet, you may be exempt as well. So here's some things you got to consider as a nonprofit. First of all nonprofits are not tax exempt. So what do I mean by that? If you need help understanding what a nonprofit is, then I'm linking a video above, and I'm also linking another video that gives you definitions of certain terms so you can help navigate and understand this conversation a little bit better. But the typical process to create a nonprofit is to incorporate first. Most people who operate as nonprofits end up being corporations, and they do that at the state level. So at that level, if you're a corporation, you're technically required to file a report. But what happens is typically those organizations then go on to the IRS and they apply to be tax exempt with the IRS, which is a separate process. Once you do that process and you're approved, then you're no longer required to fill out the beneficial owner information report because you're tax exempt. But here's the rub. If you're a new organization especially, you may have either 90 days, depending on when you started, or 30 days, depending on where you started, to file this report. And you're not going to get tax exempt in 30 days. You may be able to do it in 90 days, but you're not going to go through all the paperwork and everything within 30 days. That's rare. So you may be coming to a point where one separate federal organization is expecting you to file because they have no idea that you're going to be tax exempt. So they're expecting you to file this, but you know in your mind you're going to be tax exempt. So that puts you in a really gray area where you may technically be exempt eventually, but you still probably need to file to protect yourself. Here's the other thing. If you lose your tax exempt status, and this happens for a lot of people, if you lose your tax exempt status and it goes over 180 days, you're going to need to file a report so that you risk not being fined. Also, if you're a nonprofit and you own a business, then you still have to file your beneficial owner information report for the business you own. So there are some nonprofits that own for-profit entities so that they don't risk losing their own tax exempt status. They want to do some business type activities, so they create something separate. Well, those separate organizations have to file if they're for-profit and they're not tax exempt. It seems a little complicated, but if you think about it, then it makes sense. It's still a for-profit business and you got to file. But since you're technically, as a nonprofit, the owner of the for-profit, you just have to put the name of the organization. You don't necessarily have to reveal the names of individuals in that situation. So if you haven't discovered by now, there are a lot of caveats to this. There are a lot of nuances to this. So if you are in doubt, this is just my personal opinion. If you are in doubt, and if it were me, then I would file. Because as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, you risk being fined and you risk imprisonment if you willfully do not file this report. And who's the judge of what you willfully or don't willfully do? And so in order to avoid any issues, I would go ahead and file, especially since it's a very, very simple process. But there may be some people who are like, I don't want to identify that information. I don't want to share that information. That's up to you. Just know that if you're a nonprofit, and you know you're going to be tax exempt, but you're in that gray area and you're going to file, people are going to know who are associated with the nonprofit anyway. It's public information who are the incorporators of your nonprofit. It's public information who are the board members. Now the question then becomes, well, if I'm in that gray area, well, who do I put as an owner? Because a nonprofit doesn't have an owner. Let me tell you something. I don't know. Right? And these are all the kinks that have to be worked out as a part of this process. It's a new process, and this happens with all new laws. Like, it's put in law, but then when you have to implement it, it's a whole nother ball game. And because we're still in the first year of implementation, it is going to be a little bumpy. It is going to be a little confusing. That's why I say if it were me, I would just file and do the best I can and update it as I get more information. So finally, I want to talk about compliance and how to avoid $591 a day fines or imprisonment for not filing this report. It depends on when your corporation or your business was created, if you fit the requirement for a reporting company. But if your business was created before January 1st, 2024, then the deadline for you was supposed to be January 1st, 2025. So there have been some court cases challenging this requirement, and that deadline was extended to January 13th, 2025. As of the recording of this video, that deadline has been postponed and put on hold. So technically, it's still only voluntary submissions. Technically, it's not required because a court of appeals has stopped and stalled the process. But there's been a lot of back and forth from this. So that's not to say that by the time this video comes out or 3 days later, the postponement won't be lifted. So just pay close attention to this if you are putting off the filing of this, that just because it's not required right now, that may be lifted very soon, and that January 13th deadline may still be in place. If you incorporated or started your entity in 2024, you have 90 days. So if you're a new organization as of January 1st, 2024, you have 90 days to file your report. That's different from people who are kind of grandfathered in and were older and got officially started before 2024. If you started in 2024 and you filed that paperwork in 2024, you have 90 days. If you file your paperwork to create a new business as of January 1st, 2025, you have 30 days to file. And that's when it gets even more important for new organizations. You have even less time. And the challenge is a lot of people don't know about this, right? Because there are so many different kinds of requirements when you start a business or you start a nonprofit that you have to know about, right? So as a new organization, you have to know that you only have 30 days to file this, and then you risk certain fees. So let me just say this. There's been a lot of pushback on this requirement. There's been criticism on this saying that a lot of people don't know about it. The rollout has been bumpy and people shouldn't be unfairly fined because a lot of people are just now discovering it and still don't know about it. So it's not to say that they may waive some fines or fees, but I just wouldn't risk it. It's really important for you to be informed about your nonprofit and about any kind of business you create. So if you need help figuring out what to navigate with the startup process, especially for your nonprofit, I do have a free startup checklist that if you just comment checklist below, I'll send you the link to download. So it does have a link to the website for this report, along with other things you need to do in the checklist of starting a nonprofit. So just comment checklist below if you need it. Do you have any questions about the reporting requirement? It was a lot, and I felt like I was just scratching the surface. So I actually may do a couple more videos breaking this down for how to be prepared for this process. But if you have questions, please feel free to link them below. Thank you so much for watching. So Boss on a Budget is a business I created to support people who are starting their nonprofits, who need help raising money, who need help starting their organizations from scratch, because there's just not a lot of information for people who are starting from ground zero. So if you need help, visit bossonabudget.com. There's information and resources there for you. And I have countless videos on my channel helping you navigate and learn how to raise money. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.